And welcome back to Close Up, everyone. We just heard from New Hampshire Governor John Lynch about the challenges of 2009. Now I'm fortunate enough to be joined by Senate Minority Leader Peter Bragdon to talk about all this from a Republican perspective. Senator, thanks for joining us this morning.
Good to be here again.
First thing I want to touch on, something that developed this week, rather interesting up at the State House, a ban on weapons, dangerous weapons, firearms inside of the State House. This was a rule, not a law, put in place by the Facilities Committee, but according to a lot of Republicans that I've talked to on that committee, including yourself, you had no idea this was coming.
Oh, we had no idea it was coming. This is the party in charge now that's supposed to be all about transparency. There was no public notice about this. Certainly the Republicans on the committee knew nothing about it. It seems all the Democrats were well aware of it and ready to vote and not have any testimony from the public about this at all. It's unfortunate because the people who have weapons in the State House, whether it's mace or guns or whatever, do so to protect themselves. And those who work late at night, those who work on the weekends, and park over across the street at the Story Street Garage, have a long walk to do with a lot of crime going on in that area. And it's unfortunate that with no public notice, that right was revoked.
We should point out in some pro-gun states, Alaska and Texas, they have instituted similar bans at the State House there. But there is going to be some legislation, I understand, or at least an attempt to introduce some legislation to overturn this rule.
I understand there'll be an attempt to overturn that, and other states may have this, but I think the process really stinks in this as well. I don't agree with the policy, but the process is even worse. We need to allow people to comment on these things and not shut them out. We're dealing right now with an income tax on small business owners because of something that was snuck in the middle of the night. So we really got to stop this behind closed doors, secret stuff. And last-minute things with no public comment.
Now, you're referring to the LLC, the tax on the limited liability corporations. This is obviously a major issue right now, but this was part of the budget that represented about $30 million over the course of 2 years, if my understanding is correct. And when the budget was passed, there wasn't a whole lot of pushback, at least that I could find back in June when it came to the LLC. Why is this such a big deal now?
Well, there was no pushback because nobody knew about it. It showed up, the first discussion of it in the conference committee was 11:15 in the evening. 5 days later, the budget was voted on. So nobody had any idea it was there. None of the business groups had time to organize. Nobody really understood what it was. In fact, it took them 6 months at the Department of Revenue to write the rules because they didn't understand what it was. So to say that nobody complained about it isn't really fair because nobody knew about it at the time. But now we realize it's an income tax on small business owners. It will dry up small business in this state, the engine that creates the jobs. We have 55,000 people out of work. And the government and Governor Lynch's LLC plan is going to drive even more companies out.
Let's talk about we just heard from the governor a short time ago. This was a very challenging year economically for New Hampshire and states all over the country. And sacrifices were going to have to be made. The governor repeatedly said, look, I asked my department heads to cut to the bone, and they did. And we still had to lay people off. What more could have been done? I know Republicans have talked about less spending, but where?
Well, and the cry is made every year that we've cut to the bone, we can't cut it anymore. 4 years ago, the chairs of the House and Senate Finance Committee put an op-ed in all the state papers about how we've cut to the bone, we can't cut anymore. Revenues started coming in lower, and the governor said, hey, we need to cut more, and they found $50 million. So it's not impossible to find areas to achieve spending reductions, or at least to hold the line on spending. But we have commissioners in this state who collectively make $3 to $5 million if you roll in salary and benefits. They're the ones that have the day-to-day experience with their commissions and departments, and they should be told, okay, find the money. And if we have the wrong people in those positions that can't find the money or can't find the savings, then we probably need to find new people.
Moving ahead to 2010, you heard the governor just a short time ago indicate that obviously the contract squabble with the state union, the Union for State Employees, that got ugly, and it was basically an issue of furloughs versus layoffs because the union felt, look, we can't agree to a contract unless we have the guarantee that next year there are not going to be more state layoffs. Do you think that the governor or the legislature can guarantee a situation in 2010 where there won't be more layoffs of state workers?
Well, I think nobody knows what's going to happen in 2010. Certainly the economy is still struggling. Perhaps it's its bottom. Perhaps it hasn't. Perhaps it's going to stay where it is for a while. So there's no guarantees in terms of what the economy is going to do. In talking with the state employees that I've met from my district, a lot of them, their big concern is the process, and they felt they were treated unfairly, things done at the last minute behind their back, just like what we're seeing with the legislature in Concord. They feel the same way, and I think it's important in negotiations, and I've negotiated numerous contracts on the Milford School Board, that you treat people fairly, and people feel that they've been respected. In this case, they weren't. I wasn't there to see what happened, but when people feel they've been disrespected, it makes it very difficult to reach these kind of agreements.
Looking ahead to next year, what are we expecting in terms of the school building aid? You brought up the school board issue. That's a situation that's obviously going to have an effect on a lot of school districts around the state because they're going to be suspending, the state's going to have to suspend building aid, which accounts for about 40%. Is that correct? 40%?
On average, 40%.
Is that a done deal? Is that going to happen?
I don't think it's a done deal, but it seems likely that there'll be no new projects added probably after June of this year. And the reason given is that the program is unsustainable. And according to the state treasurer, it's not the program that's unsustainable, it's the financing method. 3 years ago, we started borrowing money to pay school districts for money that had already been borrowed once before. So we're basically putting the mortgage payment on a credit card. We said at the time it's a terrible financial way of doing things. It'll cause problems, and the chickens have come home to roost on that.
And basically what was happening there was your more affluent school districts were building some very nice facilities there because they could afford their 60%. And then while some of your lesser fortunate school districts, they couldn't afford the 60%, so they weren't getting anything.
Well, that's the allegation. However, the more affluent school districts get about 30%. And the less affluent districts can get up to 60+%. In my area, the Messinic School District, because of some federal money, got close to 72%, I believe. So the affluent districts were able to pass things, but it's still, in Bedford, I think it took 10 years to pass a proposal. And, those people who have to pay 70% of the bill, keep an eye on their wallets, and it's difficult to pass school projects in affluent towns as well as less affluent towns.
All right, let's get back to the budget and the Joint Underwriters Association Medical Malpractice Fund that we spoke with the governor a few minutes ago about this issue. First of all, you don't think the state even had a right to this money to begin with?
No, clearly, this, to me at least, it's a constitutional issue. The state is trying to take money that belongs to somebody else, and it's pretty clear in the Constitution that the state cannot do that. And the superior courts have certainly ruled in that direction. So I can't understand why the governor thinks that they can steal this money from this private group, but they're attempting to do that, and they built a budget around it.
We're still waiting for this state Supreme Court to make their final decision on this money. If this money is taken away, if we can't use the $110 million, what kind of recourse does the state have?
Well, I think what the state needs to do is take a look at its spending. Again, what's been driving all this, the need to steal money from the JUA, the need to tax small business owners' income, comes about by the uncontrolled spending. I know the governor says that spending was reduced in the general fund, and through some tricky accounting gimmicks, maybe technically he's correct, because they've taken money that used to be in the general fund, they've called it something else, and they've still spent it. So spending overall, apples to apples, went up 6.6% in this budget. And I think it was 17% in the prior budget. So spending is still going on at a good clip. I suppose we could say that a 6% increase in the budget is good compared to the 17% that it was last time. But when families in New Hampshire are cutting back, when the inflation rate is below 0, increasing spending 6% is really out of line.
All right, we just have a couple of minutes. Looking ahead to the next budget, Republicans have taken the platform of less spending, but what kind of plan is there? What can we look at and say, this is where we need to make the cuts, this is where we're going to be able to save jobs, and this is the right thing to do? It's easy to stand up there and ring a bell and say we need to spend less, but what's the plan?
Well, what we need to do as a government as a whole is to take a look at all the programs we have and find out which are the most important. Those that provide direct care to people that can't be provided elsewhere are certainly high priority items. But what we need to do is look at every program and say, okay, does this need to be done? And does the government need to be the one that does it? And just take a bottom-up approach to the whole thing. As I said, we have commissioners that collectively are paid somewhere under $5 million in salary and benefits. They have the ability to make these decisions. Somebody needs to tell them, okay, here's how much money you have, now how are we going to fix this?
And there's an effort to repeal a couple of the taxes and fees that were instituted last year. The camping fee, 9%, how's that going in terms of that effort?
Oh, there'll be a bill certainly filed. At least at a minimum, it'll allow these items to have public hearing. The campground tax, where campers are subject to the room and meals tax, even though they bring their own room and their own meal, that had no public hearing, came in the middle of the night. The income tax on small business owners, middle of the night, no public hearing. By filing these bills, we at least force a public hearing so the legislators in Concord and the bureaucrats understand that these taxes affect people.
And I can see that the process is just as much an issue with a lot of Republicans as is the legislation
Process
itself.
is very important to me and a lot of other Republicans.
Senator, thanks very much for your time. Good seeing you.
Good to be here.
See you up in Concord very shortly.
Absolutely.